Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us for our second Water Legislator webinar focused on milestones of Colorado water in 2022. I'm Abby Burke, the Western Rivers Regional Program Manager for Audubon Rockies, your webinar co-host this morning, along with Samantha Grant, Audubon's Senior Coordinator for Western Rivers. Happy spring to you. As our birds approach peak migration, Audubon hopes your spring has been a good balance of work and rejuvenation. As we begin, I want to extend a round of thanks to you, our audience, and our speakers this morning for sharing the start of your day. Hopefully you are settling kind of into your morning, and as we gather online for our legislator-focused discussion on water. Legislators, I invite you to identify yourself and say hello to panelists in the chat, and thank you for your service to our great state. Again, welcome to this morning's Water Legislator webinar, Milestones for Colorado Water in 2022. For the smoothness of webinar function and accessibility, attendees have been muted and video sharing has been disabled to preserve connectivity. We have about 240 registrants this morning, and we want to preserve our bandwidth. Please add questions to the chat at any time. Time permitting, we will hold Q&A following all of our panelists' presentations. We will conclude at 8:45 a.m. to allow legislators time to transition to the floor. Audubon looks at landscape conservation through the lens of birds and is invested in healthy watersheds, rivers, and wetlands for birds and people. We work seamlessly with Water for Colorado Coalition, as well as the Healthy Headwaters Work Group, to pursue these goals and to build resilience for our natural systems that supplies water for all of us. We are all connected by water. In Colorado, we collaborate, innovate, and progress together towards our sustainable water future for people and the environment. The future of Colorado is dependent on clean, reliable water coming from healthy rivers and watersheds, as each of us are connected by it. Collectively as a state, from residents to decision makers, we need to lean in and to learn more and participate in the decisions around our water resources. The decisions we make about water impact all of Colorado. Today, we have the privilege of hosting and hearing from Senator Simpson, Russ Schumacher, Director Rebecca Mitchell, Russ Sands, and we have just a great program for you this morning. With this, I'd like to welcome Senator Simpson, and I invite you to share your thoughts on the importance of water to all of Colorado. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Abby. It's a pleasure to be here. I've participated in these webinars before, so it's fun to be on the panel and visit with folks this morning. So Cleave Simpson, represent Senate District 35, was elected in 2020, so I'm just kind of 15 months into the job. I live in Alamosa. I'm a fourth generation farmer and rancher, and one of the very few in the legislature that actually owns a water right. So water was really kind of paramount in my decision to run for or seek office at the legislature. So certainly folks on here would appreciate as the supply of water continues to really decline, become more challenging year after year, and demands continue to grow. It was really important for me to step up and be a voice at the legislature, somebody again who has a direct connection to water and its importance. So we really have the risk to fundamentally change what Colorado looks like in our connectivity with water, whether it's agricultural interests, the historical traditional buy and dry model certainly doesn't work going forward. But even in the recreational environmental space, the pressures are just going to continue to grow exponentially. So important. I found it really important for me to be there and be that voice that recognizes how we all are indeed connected to water. So this session really is kind of indicative of what I think things are to come at the state legislature and discussions around water. There are a number of bills I'm either on or active in or involved in around water, groundwater in particular in the Rio Grande Basin and the Republican River Basin, or compact compliance issues and statutorily required aquifer sustainability issues. So I'm a sponsor of a groundwater bill in that regard. There's a ton of discussion, particularly here recently, about water speculation issues, and I'm talking about financial speculation. There was discussion certainly with the Nebraska governor making a declaration earlier this year about the South Platte and their intent to come into Colorado and divert their portion of the South Platte out of Colorado and into Nebraska. Turf buyback bill. A lot of discussion over the last several months with fire suppression ponds and their request for really an exemption from the prior appropriation system. So, man, just an abundance of talk around water, which is really exciting for me. And again, a lot of the reason why, I chose to be here. But even above and beyond the legislation that's happening, I know CWCB, and I had served historically on the Interbasin Compact Committee as a representative from the Rio Grande Basin, and extensive discussions about demand management, and again, the challenges in the Colorado River system, again, really with dwindling supplies and ever increasing demand. So I did read or understand that CWCB has suspended those discussions around demand management, and then really strikes a chord with me and hits really close to home. A group called Renewable Water Resources has made a presentation to Douglas County commissioners in December last year, where they want to seek some of the funding that Douglas County has through their ARPA funds to stand up and promote their concept of the intention to dry up tens of thousands of irrigated acres in the San Luis Valley and move that water via pipeline to the Front Range, and in this instance directly to Douglas County. So boy, there's not a lack of opportunities and discussions around the water security issues in this state. I'm one that absolutely advocates that this is no longer really drought we're talking about. It's really the aridification of the West. I see it on the Rio Grande. I farm and ranch there and depend on snowpack and flows out of the Rio Grande to support my farm. So this is just, again, the challenges just continue to grow exponentially, and so excited to represent folks in southern Colorado and the Arkansas Valley and the Wet Mountain Valley and the San Luis Valley, and be part of these discussions. Really important stuff, and happy to be here today, Abby. I appreciate the chance to engage with folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Simpson, your time and your timely words shared with us this morning. Really appreciate that. Thank you again. With this, I'd like us to transition and next to talk about our changing hydrologic context. We have Russ Schumacher, Colorado State Climatologist. So thank you for sharing this hydrologic information with us this morning, Russ. And when you're ready, the presentation is yours.
All right, thanks so much, Abby. You see my slides okay?
Got it, thank you.
All right, and thanks, Senator Simpson, for kicking us off this morning in relation to these important issues. So I'll try to place a little bit of context around what's happening in the state in terms of how climate and climate change are affecting water, and what we might see going forward in the future. To begin, just very briefly, for those who might not be familiar with our office, I'll give just a quick introduction to what we do. We're based at the Department of Atmospheric Science at CSU in Fort Collins, and have been the state climate office here since the 1970s, with primary support from the CSU Ag Experiment Station, because we know that weather and climate are certainly central to agriculture, as well as many other topics. And here's a picture of our team. And so we see our mission as doing climate monitoring, so keeping track of what's happening in the state. Climate research, mostly applied topics related to things like drought and snowpack and high impact weather and so forth. And then climate services, we're here as a resource to provide data, to provide analysis expertise, give presentations like this and so forth. So if we can ever be of assistance to the legislators or members of the public, we're here to help. Okay, so let's take a look at, to begin, I think it's always useful to take a look at a map of the average annual precipitation across Colorado, shown here, which really highlights the diversity of climates that we have in our state. Everything going from the high desert of the San Luis Valley of 6 or 7 inches of precipitation per year only on average, to our high mountains where, for example, in the Park Range, you get over 50 inches of precipitation per year on average, mostly in the form of snow, and everything in between, the mountains and valleys on the west slope, the Palmer Divide, a little bit wetter than the river valleys on the eastern plains, and so just a great variety of climate regimes, which makes it fascinating, but also challenging to study what's happening with our climate and with our water here in the state, because most of our water does originate from the snowpack in the high mountains. So, what Senator Simpson referred to drought and kind of how we define that, and we can define drought in a lot of different ways, and I'll try to walk through some of that. For example, if we look at short time periods, so this is 3-month time periods, and basically the brown lines here, the details aren't that important, but what you see is, the brown lines going up and down, very kind of spiky graph here. This goes back to the late 1800s through present, considers precipitation only. It's one measure of drought. But essentially the reason for showing this is that if we look at a time scale of like a few months at a time, a season, there's almost always somewhere in the state that's going to be dry over these short periods of time. It's a strong, huge variability from a wet spring to a dry summer, or vice versa, that we'd see in something like this. But if we then kind of zoom this out to longer time periods, this is long-term drought now, 48-month or 4-year time periods averaged over that. And now we see over this period some of the notable persistent droughts that people would remember or think about when you think about drought in our state. So the drought at the turn of the 20th century, the Dust Bowl era, and the 1950s, both extremely dry periods. The late 70s were a very dry period, especially in the mountains. And then the 3 very intense droughts that we've had since 2000, the 2002, 2004 period, 2012 and 13, and then the ongoing dry period that we have now. So what this shows, again, this is only related to precipitation, so it's only one metric of drought, and we'll kind of see then how things are changing in other respects to influence this. And so what is it that's changing? We know that we've always had droughts. Where does climate change come into this? Well, for one thing, it's getting warmer. That's kind of the central message in relation to climate change, just like it is the case around most of the world. Here in Colorado, we've warmed pretty substantially. Again, this goes back to the late 1800s. For annual temperature averaged across the state, and we see an increasing trend, and that trend has maybe accelerated a little bit in recent years, such that 6 of the 8 warmest years statewide have happened since 2012, in the last 10 years. So we're seeing kind of this steady uptick in temperature, and in particular we're seeing this in the summers, at least recently, where this trend has accelerated even further. So this is summer only, and what we see here is over the state, the 7 warmest summers that we've had statewide have been since 2000. And we've gotten to a point essentially where what would have been considered an extremely hot summer, back in the middle of the 20th century, is now essentially a pretty average summer. And so that's certainly had influences, as we'll see, with respect to water as well. And the primary reason for that is that if it's warmer, if it's windier, if it's less humid, that air then is essentially thirstier for water. So the atmosphere, if it's warm, dry, windy, is trying to pull water out of, wherever the water is, the soils, the forests, the streams, the reservoirs, the crops, and so forth. And so all else being equal, as it gets warmer, this what we call evapotranspiration or evaporative demand, the thirst of the atmosphere for water, is going up. And so how we can how we sort of see how that's influencing water in the state, is I'll show it through this illustration, another couple of graphs here, but I think it tells this story pretty clearly. So this is just basically a slightly different version of what I showed you a couple minutes ago of this long-term, 48-month, 4-year periods of whether they're wet or dry. And again, across the state, going back to the late 1800s, we can see, the relatively wet period show up here of the 1920s, around the time when the Colorado River Compact was being negotiated, a quite wet time period. And then the fluctuations, the Dust Bowl, the drought of the 1950s, the relatively wet period of the 1980s and 90s, and then the 3 droughts with a couple of wet periods in between. So if we look at it this way, we sort of see this fluctuation between wet and dry, and we know that droughts are a part of our climate and always have been. But if we now add in the effects of temperature on evaporative demand, so kind of accounting for that increased thirst for water, from the warmer climate, I'll switch to the graph and keep your eye over here on the right-hand side of the last 20 years or so. What we see is these 2 periods that look pretty wet in there essentially go away. And so I'll just click back and forth between that. So we're going from precipitation only to precipitation plus temperature being accounted for. And so what we see is basically when we have dry periods, they get worse, and when we have wet periods, that water doesn't go as far in these warmer conditions. And so, most indications are that this will continue, right? The warming, at least, will continue. This is from climate model projections, a couple of different scenarios. One very high emissions scenario that's probably not very likely, but perhaps a more likely scenario shown here of moderate emissions going forward, which reaches us to being, or on average 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer by 2070 than the 20th century average. And so what we've seen so far, right, is what we would have considered a hot summer in the 20th century is now kind of an average summer. And what we may see in the future then is that what we consider a hot summer now will be an average or even a cool summer out in 30 to 50 years. How will precipitation change? That's more complicated and is not as clear. There's some indications that for example, the winters might even get wetter in terms of precipitation, but then the summer's getting drier. There's a lot of uncertainty around precipitation. There's a lot of certainty around the warming going forward, less so around precipitation. So this is still a challenge in terms of exactly what the hydrology is going to look like in the future. But we sort of know that as the warming continues, that the stress on the system, even if precipitation doesn't change much, is going to continue. And so the phrase that often comes up in these conversations around water, right, is that climate change is water change. And so we kind of imagine the future, perhaps that the statistics of precipitation don't even change very much, or maybe it even, we get a little bit more rain and snow in the mountains in the winter. The increased temperatures cause changes in other ways. They increase that evaporative demand, which puts stress on plants, on crops, on reservoirs, on forests, leading to increased fire danger, all of those things. And so we know that we've always had, and we always will have droughts, but this is that trend towards, what's been referred to as hot drought, or, some people call it aridification, right? That even if the precipitation doesn't change much, we're not headed in the right direction. And then of course, the increased temperature can affect the snowpack and the snow melt as well. Earlier snow melt or faster snow melt, which changes how much and when the water is available in the rivers. So just very quickly to wrap up, just kind of a picture of where we're at right now. This is the snowpack picture across the state. 92% of average, not so bad, but the new projection, or the river flow projections from the Colorado River Basin Forecast Center are not as rosy. So 92% of average statewide snowpack, but only expecting 80% of average flow into Blue Mesa, 55% into McPhee. I think it's 64% into Powell. So we're kind of seeing this issue again, where the snowpack that we have, even when it doesn't look so bad, isn't quite going as far as it used to. And there's the current drought monitor picture. I would imagine this might start to look a little bit worse when the update happens this week, given the dry conditions here on the Front Range and Plains. And as we've already seen in April, quite a bit of fire activity, brush fire, wildfire activity across the Eastern Plains and much of the Great Plains of the US, which is already coming true. And the outlooks are unfortunately not pointed in the right direction in terms of fire danger. A lot can change between now and July, but something we'll have to be on guard for. So I will stop there. Thanks for having me. There's our website, my email, our Facebook and Twitter, and we do monthly webinars where we update, climate current conditions and drought conditions and so forth. There's the website to sign up. So thanks so much for having me, and I'll look forward to the Q&A at the end if we have time.
Great. Russ, thank you very much. What a strong presentation, and just incredible information for all of us to really understand and appreciate, going forward, because this information certainly informs all of our water management across the state. So thank you so much for your time this morning and sharing this great information. Next, I'd like to welcome Director Mitchell, Colorado River Commissioner and Director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Director Mitchell, thank you for sharing your insights with us this morning. When you're ready, the presentation is yours.
Thank you, Abby, and thanks for controlling the presentation. It's hard for me to speak and control the presentation. And thank you for having me here today. And Senator Simpson, thank you for your words about the importance of water. And Russ, I don't want to say thank you for your presentation because it was pretty sad, but I think it's important that we all know what's happening and leave it to Russ to make sure we hear about aridification and the history of drought and the current state that we are in. It is tough times for sure. Our hydrology is changing, and you heard Russ mention the challenge, climate change is water change, and that I think really stemmed from Brad Udall summarizing this situation that we're in. And so as director of the Water Conservation Board, my role is to oversee the development of water policies and programs that conserve, develop, protect, and manage Colorado's water for present and future generations. But then also, as the state's Colorado River Commissioner, my other role is to ensure that Colorado's priorities are represented in the negotiations with the 7 basin states. Those roles really go hand in hand because water users across our state are directly and indirectly impacted by big river issues. Abby, you can go to the next slide. Let me start a bit with the big picture. The Colorado River Compact turns 100 years old this year, and you heard Russ mention the hydrology at the creation of the compact, and I'm sure that had influence on where we are today. But Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and California are all the 7 states party to that agreement, and it provides stability and certainty in managing the Colorado River system and infrastructure. And I think one of the important principles that I want to make sure folks are aware of from the compact is equity in allocations. When the compact was developed, it really was developed with a 7.5 million acre foot per year to the lower basin, 7.5 million acre feet per year to the upper basin, but it also provided us with the legal ability to develop into the future at our own pace while retaining our legal entitlements. That's incredibly important right now. Things have changed since the compact was negotiated, but the compact and its guarantees of equity between the lower basin and upper basin must and do remain. It's our foundation, but on top of that are a series of agreements, each of them allowing us to respond to situations that those 7 state signatories didn't envision a century ago. So first, you've probably heard a bit about some of the situations that we're in now in the news, but I want to talk about some of those additional agreements. So first is the 2007 interim guidelines. They were developed to respond to drought conditions. Those guidelines tied the elevations at Lake Mead and Lake Powell together, and then enabled the lower basin to store intentionally created surplus, like a bank account for water savings. Those guidelines, though, I think it's really important to focus on, were interim. They're not permanent. We don't have to continue to do those things that way into the future. They were interim because we wanted to see how effective they were in practice. And so while I think the current crisis that we're in speaks for itself, the guidelines expire in 2026, and the 7 states will be negotiating how those future operating guidelines are structured. Also layered on top of the compact are the 2019 drought contingency plans, or you'll hear them talked about as the DCPs. I want you to think about those as a Band-Aid. There was recognition that more was needed on top of the 07 guidelines to protect the system, and those drought contingency plans are a temporary response to the situation. A couple elements, or a few elements, that have been in the news with some regularity lately. For the upper basin, there's a drought response operations agreement, and a demand management feasibility investigation and weather modification. I want to highlight the DROA, or the Drought Response Operations Agreement, specifically because this year's plan will be finalized within the month. I'm hoping before the end of this month. But DROA provides some annual plans to protect elevations at Lake Powell by releasing water from Colorado River storage projects, or CRISP reservoirs. So the compact, the 07 guidelines, drought contingency plans, they're all part of the framework of the Colorado River system. And we have layers of preventative measures that we've taken to address climate change and bad hydrology. Abby, next slide, please. However, I think it's really important that when we talk about this current crisis, that we're not just talking about supply and what's coming into the system. When we talk about the depleted Colorado River, we're talking about the impacts of unsustainable overuse downstream of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. So as we move forward, as Colorado moves forward towards negotiating new operating agreements with the other basin states, we must ensure that what comes next is fair and sustainable. And I want to talk about some of the guiding principles. They're not just my guiding principles, but it really has come from input from all of our state's water users. As we go out across the state, hear concerns, that's the things that we're bringing back. When the people that feel the risks and build the resilience that underpin our relationship with the Colorado River, that's where we're taking these. That's where these guiding principles have come from. So first and foremost, Colorado water users need security and certainty for water supply. Second, operations at Lake Powell and Lake Mead must be improved to be responsive to real hydrology. Third, the lower basin must, and absolutely must, address their overuse and depletions that exceed available supply. And fourth, but certainly not last, the tribal nations must be consulted and included. They too deserve security and certainty of water supply. And I'm proud to say that Colorado has water rights settlements with both of the tribes in Colorado. Next slide, please, Abby. So our interstate work goes hand in hand with the work that we're doing within our state. The Colorado River directly and indirectly impacts people from Denver to Salida to Grand Junction. So Russ Sands, you'll be hearing from him, CWCB's section chief for water supply planning. He's going to speak next about the exciting work that we're doing to update the water plan. Just a reminder that the water plan is the state's framework for solutions to its water challenges. And I believe his overview will really segue into actions that communities and water users can take for the benefit of our state. So thank you. And thanks.
Thank you, Director Mitchell. Thank you for sharing your key insights and for all your work you do on our behalf of our state, and just amazing opportunities in the next year to come alone. And so thank you for reporting on your activity and how you are moving our state forward together, and just a lot of activity in the Colorado River anymore. So with that, thank you again. And I'd like to turn it over to Russ Sands. The water from the Colorado River reaches all four corners of our state. So we have Russ Sands, section chief in the water supply planning of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, to discuss another key water milestone, the inaugural update of the Colorado Water Plan, the importance, the process, and how to engage. When you're ready, Russ, the presentation is yours.
Thanks. And Abby, real quick, if you could just give me a heads up, are we seeing the screen? Perfect. Thank you. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for having us. Russ Sands, Section Chief, CWCB, or the other Russ S, as always happens when I'm presenting in the same room with Russ Schumacher. I wanted to talk a little bit today about the Colorado Water Plan as we're updating it, and really, it is exciting work, and I appreciate Director Mitchell's comments and nods. So as we focus on the kind of intrastate issues, it's just imperative that we continue to collaborate and build resilience. So I thought I would just kind of lead today with kind of 5 things that you should know about the water plan. So the first piece is that it has 3 components. In reality, we've been working on the water plan update since the first water plan came out in 2015. It wasn't too far after that we started the contracting process to really update the technical foundation. So previously, you may be familiar with what was called SWASI, or the Statewide Water Supply Initiative, which was last updated in 2010. In light of the water plan coming out in 2015, that got a bit of a revamp and is now called the Analysis and Technical Update to the Colorado Water Plan, which came out in 2019. That information, that technical backbone, if you will, really informed the Basin Implementation Plan updates. Those took huge strides forward, both just in terms of getting a refresh, but also kind of carving out this volume 1 that was a shorter version that are all, they look the same. So if you want to find information on what the Colorado is doing, Colorado Basin Roundtable is doing in one area, and compare that to what the Yampa White Green's doing, you can go and find the same information in each of these volume 1s. Are a lot shorter read, each of them probably about 20 pages back and front printed out. And all of these, that kind of technical analysis, the local vision and solution sets are really all feeding up into the comprehensive update to the water plan itself. So the second thing to know is that we really are embracing the latest science here. Kind of giving a nod to Russ Schumacher's presentation, we have incorporated climate change in real numeric values for the first time. So the original water plan has these 5 narrative scenarios, and the challenge through the technical update, kind of the shorter version of that, just the tech update or technical update, was to take those narratives and turn them into numbers. And so we are using the same underlying climate science and looking out to 2050 and seeing at that maximum end a projection of 4.2 degree Fahrenheit warming, which has significant impacts for all sectors in the state: environment, muni, agriculture. And what we are seeing in that hottest growth scenario, that last scenario, is up to 750,000 acre-foot gap annually on the municipal side, even greater for agriculture. And what's really bringing that down in that kind of next scenario, which has the same increase in climate temperature, the same population growth, but as more of a social value ethic where conservation, water efficiency is really being embraced across the sectors, and we're seeing that have significant impacts for reducing those gap numbers. So these scenarios give us kind of a bookend of what a maximum and minimum might be for increased water needs in the future, and are really helpful. We're also using underlying Colorado Decision Support System framework for modeling. So we've taken huge strides forward in how we're using data in the water plan update. The third thing to know is that it's built on stakeholder input. Everything we do, again, this process since 2015, as we got, I think, 30,000 comments on the first water plan, and those haven't stopped coming in. So some of that by design, we've really built in these intentional moments to get additional stakeholder input. So in those first stages of updating the technical update, we had a technical advisory group, or tags, across the state. We then use that to help inform the technical update. That went into an implementation working group. You heard Senator Simpson talk about the Interbasin Compact Committee. We had one member from each basin's Interbasin Compact Committee representative, and then 2 members from each roundtable inform what a basin implementation plan would look like. And then the roundtables got hard at work and have been working since 2019, really just came out this January, to have these BIPs, or basin implementation plans, updated. And you can go to engagecwcb.org to see those. And as we were doing that, we really turned our attention to the water plan and trying to interrupt that process, realizing that we could get stakeholder input on the front end of drafting the water plan rather than just on the back end. And so we started a water plan scoping phase that I'll kind of show some stats from here in a second. But one common theme across every meeting that we had and every workshop was really a focus on equity and inclusivity and diversity across the state. And so we interrupted, a process again to add, with support from Governor Polis and Director Dan Gibbs from DNR, a water equity task force that really looked to include one member from each roundtable across the state, one member from each basin that maybe was someone who had never been to a roundtable meeting, a fresh perspective, a new voice to tell us about their relation to water and where they might want to engage more, how we could engage them more. We had one representative from our Sequia communities, and we had 2 tribal representatives from the 2 federally recognized tribes. So one member from the Ute Mountain Ute and one member from the Southern Ute. So that task force completed its work, and it was really aimed at developing a set of guiding principles. So we have 5 guiding principles also up on Engage CWCB that are helping us think through the water plan. So as I noted, in this just last year, this scoping phase, these are some quick stats. We typically have about 400 stakeholders across the state we engage. Through that scoping phase, we actually got 1,200 participants across 15 different workshops to give us input. That yielded about 200 pages of notes and ideas that people had that they wanted us to consider bringing into the water plan, along with our hardworking staff and their great ideas, our amazing board members providing input, and then ongoing input from IBCC, the roundtables, and of course, our water equity task force. So principle 4 here just is, I think it's always important to step back and say, well, what is a water plan? And I think it occupies kind of dual roles. On one level, the water plan really is the shared vision for Colorado. It sets the stage for collaboration and resilience, these principles that are so critical to our future and meeting those challenges. And the water plan, if anything, is a megaphone for shining light on these critical statewide water issues that we have to focus on. And it puts agriculture, municipal, environment, and I would also argue now equity on this kind of equal playing field to say all of these things have to be part of the consideration as we're moving forward. And we're only going to be resilient if we do this together. On a more simple level, the water plan is a strategy document for CWCB. It's our strategy as an agency. And we've tried to do is work more intently on the front end to bring other agencies along with us to find areas where we could collaborate together. But certainly we will have actions in the plan that are really aimed at what we as an agency and our partners can collaborate on. And then again, as Director Mitchell said, kind of setting this roadmap or framework for where others can help us take actions, either creating their own actions, coming in for grants, or taking local action at the local level, or otherwise working with us on some of the actions that are laid out in the water plan. The priorities in the water plan, some of these, if you've read the inaugural water plan, will seem very familiar. You have these kind of three, what were initially called water values, but a productive economy that supports vibrant, sustainable cities, ag, recreation, and tourism, efficient, effective water infrastructure, a strong environment with healthy watersheds, rivers, streams, and wildlife. These are just the things that make Colorado great. And what was always an underlying theme, really all the work that we have done as an agency over the last 20 years has really been born out of drought, ongoing drought conditions, but certainly spurred by 2002, 2003 drought and the Hayman fire. And now this cycle of flood, fire, and drought we're seeing is all too familiar and coming back to us. So this fourth value of creative, forward-thinking solutions that are sustainable and resilient to changing conditions are really embracing this idea of resilience and embedding that in the water plan. Those all lead into these 4 action areas, which just quickly, loosely break into cities, farms, streams, and people. And we're doing this all, adding this into a much shorter space. So we have 2,000 pages of text and material and input to now create into a shorter, streamlined water plan. That leads me to my last point, that people really bring the plan to life. So this 5th principle is just a nod that the water plan needs you. So when the draft comes out on June 30th, and we will have a 90-day public comment period, by all means make a comment, but what we really need are commitments to action. And that's where you all and the public play such a critical role in helping us meet our future challenges.
Mm-hmm. Great. Russ, thank you so much for those comments. We really all look forward to participating in the water plan update, and just thank you for all of your hard work with guiding this process going forward. And with this, I'd like to turn it back over to Director Mitchell for some closing remarks and how people are really the source of this change and how we make our water decisions together. So Director Mitchell, when you're ready.
Thanks. And I think I've learned a few things today, and I think we all have. First and foremost, climate change is disrupting our hydrology. And as our water supplies change, we need policies and programs that keep pace. And what I also recognize is that our state has some amazing network of water users, leaders, and stakeholders who care about our water future. And have many opportunities, specifically this summer, to be involved in that outcome. This year is a big year for water. The Governor Polis declared this the year of water, and the Water 22 campaign is highlighting actions across the state that Coloradans can take for water. I want to make sure that we thank the legislators for the advancing science-based policies that position Colorado to that leadership position, both within the state, intrastate, and then interstate as we're working with other states. To the public listening in, thank you for your interest in our most precious natural resource. I encourage you to continue to engage with the Colorado Water Plan process. To Abby Burke and the Audubon Rockies, thank you for hosting opportunities like today's webinar. And these provide great opportunities for our water community to engage. And then big shout out to Colorado's water users. As the headwater state, we don't have Lake Powell or Lake Mead above us. Our water users deal with variability and are dependent on real world conditions. We rely on snowpack. When the water is there, it is used and put to great beneficial use. When it's not, water users in Colorado feel that. They feel that shortage. Climate change heightens that risk. And if there's one thing I've learned about water users in our state, we will adapt together. I'm confident that Coloradans can come together to survive and thrive in the drier and more variable future. And thank you so much. Again, these are incredibly important webinars, so thank you.
Great. Director Mitchell, thank you again so much for your time this morning. Unfortunately, it's kind of the way we roll with this. We have so much great information. We are not going to be able to address Q&A, but just on a broad scale, letting folks know that the recording will be available. We are creating a blog that will have some of the key points and house this recording in that blog. We will circulate that to all registrants from today. And I also want to let you know that one of our partners, Business for Water Stewardship, is hosting on April 26th more of a business angle legislative briefing, the business case for water. And so we will try to put that registration link in the chat for you to participate with that. And with that, we will again thank you for sharing the start of your day with us and wish you a great day to come. Thanks again, everybody. Take care and see you next time. Thank you again.